Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated in the past and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called How Can We Help?, written by byRaiderUnit. How can we help? The galaxy is a vast, diverse place. Countless nation-states, free worlds, militant empires, enlightened theocracies, isolationist democracies, hive minds, merchant republics, megacorps, pacifistic monarchies, AI networks, and etc. Conflict is bound to happen every once in a while when you mix this many different species, cultures, and ideologies in the same general region. Still, there is quite the cooperation too. The galactic market is known as one of the purest forms of meritocracy due to the frenetic actions and high-speed product transfers, where merchant powers from different sides of the galaxy compete for the interests of any backwater colony that shows up. So, all in all, things are pretty great. Well, they were pretty great until they showed up. Oh, you know who they are: the Scourge, biological plague, exceedingly hostile biochemical impossibilities, profane evils, and all of that. A lot of names that really could be simplified to one, really. The Swarm. You see, it's generally accepted that when you want to build some general planet-side building, you use the building materials of the 8726 galactic cycle, like multi-purpose quick-drying building solution MPDQP for short, and the newest construction machine models. When you want to build a hyperdrive for a large-scale cargo freighter, you load in as much metallic hydrogen and helium-3 as you can onto the fusion reactors, build the FTL cores, and let the excess energy and antimatter tear classical physics a new one. When you want a big-ass gun for your dreadnought, you ask kindly for the Desotrian Fabrication Hive to use their skills in metric ton of good old titanium, platinum, and palladium to make you one. You know, common sense. As it turns out, though, the Swarm at one point looked at all of that and said, you know what? I could do a whole lot better with just meat. And surprisingly enough, they did it. Don't ask me how. We still haven't figured that one out. And so, somehow, these Feckers made FTL-capable vessels that are basically living beings. Heat sinks, meat. Hull, meat. Fabricators, meat. Weapons, meat. Armor, meat. And bones and organs, to be fair. You know, organic matter, generally. See, there was just an itty-bitty little problem. It seems that at some other point, the Swarm just decided, hey, we could really use some more organic matter, and these people around us really don't use it right, so let's just, take it. You can probably guess where things are going at this point, but unfortunately for us, this didn't happen in our galaxy. And I guess the idiots in the other one were pacifist pansies or something, because we were just lazing around, empire administrating, researching, trading, enslaving, and all that Star Nations do, when suddenly we hear a knock at the edge of our galaxy. And before we even have a chance to ask who's there, there's a whole galaxy's worth of biological Feck ships consuming everything they can. Not even a warning, a long monologue on how we were inferior biological forms or something. Not a hail at all. Just coming in and consuming the life of whole planets. So, things were not great at that point. Not really. Thankfully, though, most, if not all, of the nations of the galaxy managed to unite under the banner of "We don't want to fucking die" and fight together. Even synthetics. Turns out the Swarm also uses some non-organic materials, and there are life-bearing worlds on synthetic territories. So, they were thrown into the exterminate bag, too. Real movie crap, to be quite honest. It was ought to be awkward for some of the hives, though. Some of their architecture really tried to resemble their primitive organic origins, and it kinda made them look bad when they were fighting the Swarm. Still, point being, everyone fighting together, slavers, freedom fighters, religious fundamentalists, militant atheists, herbivores, carnivores, monarchists, Democrats, ruthless capitalists, the exploited proletariat, organic, synthetic, everyone really, the real deal. Thing is, we weren't winning. Turns out that when someone else has figured out how to cross the intergalactic void using meat ships and you can't leave your own using real ships, it means they got a technological advantage against you. Who knew? So yeah, we were being butchered. More like recycled, really, but even thinking that makes me uncomfortable. So I'll stick with the other way to say it. And so, about a third of the galaxy fell. Real freaking crap. Dead people all around. And we did completely lose a whole bunch of sapient species to the damned bastards. That is, until they reached the humans. Don't get me wrong, the humans still lost. They aren't some super being capable of unstoppable warfare. And they can exhaust their resources too. But for a good while, they managed to hold the line incredibly well. Anything that they managed to capture, they didn't dissolve into a putrid biogoop, was shared as quickly as possible to develop countermeasures against the swarm. It seemed to be really turning around, all things considered. We didn't really see the cracks in the human war machine. For a species that wasn't known for being remarkably strong or intelligent, they sure seemed like the heroes of the whole fecking galaxy. That is, until they broke. You see, it was a total fecking mess, but from what we managed to piece together, humanity's defense was insane. Their whole planet, whole ass planets, were turned into FTL-denying fortresses, where every man, woman, and child fought. The lucky ones were given a poor excuse for a weapon and told to scrounge the ammo from the corpses. It was a nightmarish scene, if anything. I guess they really were pursuit predators pre-sapiens, because I can't otherwise explain the stunts their adolescents managed to pull off, seemingly instinctually, with wire, manure, and a single scattergun shell even after running for 3 hours straight. Not to mention, they were starving. Did I mention that they were starving? Because they were. When you turn your whole planet into a fortress, you don't have that much space left for farmland. So the humans ate other humans, or even the swarm. Let me tell you something, I've seen some vids, and if you manage to make a machine want to puke, you have to be doing something exceedingly disgusting. Not that I blame them. I mean, do what you gotta do, but to be honest, they probably wouldn't need to do that if the other star nations actually considered helping in more ways than setting their military fleets to garrison the systems. Hey, I said that everyone was working together, not that everyone was working well together. So, back to the point. Humanity broke. After half a decade, where they stopped the whole ass swarm nearly by themselves and supplied the whole rest of the galaxy with objects to experiment on, the humans' inner worlds finally collapsed. We barely had time to register it happening, as the swarm was apparently fecking pissed that they had to hold off a lunch for so long. Still, the humans brought us precious time, and we managed to reverse engineer enough of the swarm's biotechnology into regular technology, and adapt it into starships and ground troopers. So things were finally looking up. Except, Earth and the colonies becoming tomb worlds and all that. In the following fighting, entire economies were spent on building and maintaining navies to combat the swarm. As it often happens in war, some people exploited the cracks showing up on supply lines. Some sapient rights were disrespected, some household items suffered insane inflation, and a couple billion sapients starved. But overall, we were managing to turn the unstoppable advance of the swarm into merely a series of Pyrrhic victories, which was a pretty big upgrade at the time. Let's not mention who suffered those Pyrrhic victories, though. It took a few decades to get our act back together again, but we finally managed to push them back, at a great expense, and for a really grueling and painful few cycles. We had more than half of the galaxy on non-affront to the Creator hands. After that, it only took a few decades to push them back nearly 3/4 of the way through. It still wasn't easy enough. Beyond clear military problems, we had hundreds of billions of refugees from thousands of different species going to whatever planet managed to hold them, with little to no regard to climate necessities, biological compatibility, or even diet. Well, that might sound like a wet dream for one of those militant, let's unite the whole galaxy in a single huge space station types. It really isn't fun to deal with 1,500,000 ammonia-breathing, chemosynthesizing 3.9 G pressure beings on your agricultural nitrogen-oxygen 1.3 G world. I know that from personal experience. So even when little was actually going wrong, still thousands were dying by the minute, and many of these didn't even have a planet to return to anymore. Still, we were winning by reasonable standards, so morale was relatively high, and the swarm was retreating despite also working through the best efforts to adapt to our new weaponry and tactics. after some more decades of totally boring warfare I'm sure you don't care about, the swarm was barely a threat anymore to the galactic stage. So now the Star Nations had diplomatic meetings. You see, now we had thousands of bankrupt, resource-dry, well-armed nations and a half a galaxy worth of empty planets, though few were still habitable. Still, resources free for the taking. So meetings were held before things escalated out of control. Beyond the fact that some people don't want war, we also didn't know when and if the swarm would return. So we wanted to generally avoid war. So a whole bunch of votes and studies and lectures about who deserved what and what species can live where, and who should try and rescue the biosphere of that one planet. A mess, if you want me to say it kindly. There's one thing they missed in the beginning, though. The humans hadn't died. So when they figured that one out, an emergency council meeting was held. I probably should try and explain some of the belligerence on this beautifully insane vote to try and give you some context, but I think it would lose some of the impact. So I'll just tell you the members of this council were the greatest military powers at the time and leave the rest for you to read in a raw transcript. Enjoy. 47 of Axran 8896th Galactic Cycle. Half Subcycle, Council of the 57, Rome 1. Greater Commandant Lithidius Gigagalth III of the Greater Litharian Commissariat. And what is the meaning of this meeting after all? I'll let you know the half subcycle is the moment for breeding and resting for my species, and I haven't done so in the last 13 times I should. I'm not quite in the mood for petty squabbles. Serene Doge Cursed Plin of the Serene Republic of the Opsin Illith. At this time, I should be discussing how to restore half the galaxy's worth of economy and trade to my compatriots. Like the Commandant, I don't have much time to waste. Decentroian Fabrication Hive Mind, as spoken by drone A911.789.486.182. I assure you, fellow sapiens, the subject of this meeting is most important. You should know, due to complications in translation software, the hive mind refers to itself in the singular. In this case, it refers to itself and the other governments that called the meeting. Do not enjoy contact either. High Seer Kabrakduan R. Neros of the Renelin Monastic Order. In the name of the great poet, what is taking so long then? My brothers have been working the hospitals non-stop since the war, and I'd much more be satisfied helping them than having to wait here for some. Destroying Hive. Please restrain yourself from shouting, Kebrick. The drone of the Hive could also be working on reconstructing efforts it was made to do, and we are known for not wasting a single resource without reason. Lithinia's hologram shows her exhaling slowly from her respiratory pores, releasing nearly toxic amounts of stress pheromones to her surroundings. Lithinius, pardon the behavior of my compatriots and mine. It really has been too long since I've laid a lava. My hormonal systems have been getting the worst of me for a while, but may I at least know why we have to attend such a meeting at this time? The last such meeting was when the swarm still held Sector 55. Projector 8 connects. 7.312 A Gamma, the Litani Interplanetary Defensive Network. Please excuse me for arriving late. This unit has been compiling data to better represent an argument for the last 7 subcycles. As reparation for your time spent, we will send relief efforts to each one of you for a Class A colony of your choice. Chrysit Pelin. Well, this ought to be quite generous for anyone who still owns a Class A anymore. Prime Minister Tail, Enna Gareth of the Federal Union of Bilius Posen. Mr. Chrysit, please be reasonable with A Gamma. Understood. To those who refused the earlier offer, we will send one standard small shipment of metallic hydrogen to the planet or station of your choice. Now please let us return to the point of discussion. Kebrick Duan. Bitches, none of you have had the decency to explain it quite yet. The Sotrian Hive. The humans. Chrysit Plin. What about the humans? Have they risen from the grave yet? A Gamma. We've compiled conclusive evidence the human systems confederacy, or at least humanity, has survived the swarm's invasion. The council room remains silent for 13 time measuring subunits. The Thinius. What? How? Tail in Garath. We are not sure, but the humans are still alive out there. Kebrik Duan. How do you know that then? None of the other species who fell to the swarm managed to survive, despite how long humanity held out. The quarantine was still in effect. The Sotrian Hive. Among the chaos of the war, much data was lost, corrupted, or effectively made useless by the ever-shifting realities of the front. The greater mind only knows how many drones have died without warmth, being disconnected from the neural network. The same occurred with ships, stations, and many times even planets. The Desotrian drone pulses, then coughs up a lungful of biomass on the ground. Excuse me, the cure for the wheezing plague isn't quite finished yet. I'll pass the speech to A Gamma in the meantime. Projector 18 disconnects. A Gamma. As the Desotrian was saying, much was lost during the war. Amongst the millions of sightings of unknown, unregistered, or otherwise irregular or lost ships and stations during this war, we have managed to identify a pattern, a distinctly human pattern amongst them. Tail in a Gareth. After half a cycle of searching and cross-referencing data points, we believe to have come to understand the situation humanity found itself in. Please take a look at this presentation. The central projector opens up a display of the soul, the human home system, and an extended view of the human-controlled space. Tail in a Gareth. Since humans have proven themselves to be utterly incompatible with most other galactic biospheres, the habitable planets they did find in their immediate vicinity became remarkably developed, pushing the limits of terraforming and organic matter management technology. As the swarm began their invasion of human space, the projection highlighted the system in cyan and infrared. Humanity mastered all system garrisons incredibly quickly, to the point of rivaling Litanei mobilization. A Gamma. The last statement is not backed by conclusive proof. The humans did, however, display remarkable reaction times and logistic strength for an organic, post-FTL nation. Chrysit Pelin. Come on. Are you going to get to the point, or please the humans' collective sexual organs some more? A Gamma. The Litanei Interplanetary Fabrication Network officially rescinds the reparations offer sent to the Serene Republic of Opsin Illith. Chrysit Pelim. You can try and irritate me, machine, but this reparation wouldn't even make a dent in the cycle's credit production for the year. I'll let you know that. Lithinius. Chrysit Pelin, you better cease your sound-producing organs immediately, before I make you wish you did. Chrysit Pelin's crest feathers promptly lower, and his figure slightly steps back in the projector. Projector 18 reconnects. The Dystotrian fabrication hive mind, spoken by drone A911.789.486.183. Please, let us continue the presentation peacefully from now on. Correct? Lithinius. Correct. Neither Chrysit nor Kubrick Duan should speak a word without requesting permission from your part any longer. Vote for speech containment passed for all the projectors 2 and 4. 4 votes for 2 votes against. Kubrick Duan. Permission to speak, Council. Permission granted. 5 votes for, 1 vote against. Kubrick Duan. Firstly, I'd like to protest against the speech containment to be set onto me, thanks to Chrysit's outbreak. But secondly, if the humans survived this long, why haven't we heard from them? It is to be expected that we would aid them post-swarm invasion, even with what little we had spared at the time. Teal in a Gareth. Your protest is noted, and your question will soon be answered as we continue with the presentation. May I? 4 recognizable gestures of consent recognized. Tail in a Gareth. Very well. During the humans' superbly organized defense, they brought everything they could to support the front. After some extremely careful archaeological search and decoding of old transmission recordings by human military, we began to understand why. The humans worked so diligently, not simply out of desperation or fear. The humans believed they were the only reasonable line of defense for the whole galaxy, which at the time they most possibly were, and the only hope for survival for all other nations in the Milky Way, as they call it. Lithinius, excuse me, am I understanding this correctly? The humans performed above and beyond expectations, not for themselves, but for the whole galaxy. The same humans who endlessly interfered with my colonies and operations, sent privateers to my supply lines, and raided black sites. The Sotrian Hive. That is most possibly because they believed that your regime was illegitimate due to some political drudgery the Hive doesn't understand very well. Tyranny I think they call it. But that is beyond the point. As we continued to decode the transmissions, more and more became apparent. Human society wasn't merely struggling to defend itself in the galaxy, it was ripping itself apart. Every available resource, every man, every gram of steel that could be spared was sent to the war machine. The central projector switches to recreation of the image acquired of Earth, the city of Nanjing. The imagery depicts the streets of the city after 0.8 cycles of the swarm reaching it. They continue to live without the barest necessities. I spare to my worker drones. Lithinius. Nargoth have mercy. The Lith drone covers her mandibles in an attempt to hold the gastronomical contents from spitting out, barely succeeding in doing so. A Gamma. As you can see, the image zooms in on a human child holding a crudely manufactured rail handgun while devouring the body of a swarm carrier drone. Lithinius pauses the transmission of a hologram for 50 TMS. The human defense can be easily described as brutal but effective. Despite all of that, though, as we all know, the human defense fell. As the Prime Minister just described, though, humans believed to be fighting for the sake of protecting the whole galaxy, so they didn't have contingency plans in case of failure. Even then, being the remarkably tenacious species they are, they apparently managed to survive. The Satrian Hive. Roughly 7 cycles after the fall of humanity, some of our Class B hives began receiving transmissions from a nearby fleet. They offered services, trade, and resources, so we assumed them to be an opportunistic traders, or more well-off refugees, and left the scanners to more important matters, dealing with these fleets irregularly. Eventually, they left our space. Tail in a Gareth. Soon after, some of our frontier colonies began receiving similar transmissions from similar fleets. Hundreds of encounters spread over several cycles, and some even during swarm incursions on the system. So we believed them to be part of some relief effort or some minor galactic powers and left them be. The only real thing of note was that they continued doing so after every colony they passed, despite close distance to the swarm. Kisset Pelin. Permission to speak, Council. Permission granted. 4 votes for, 2 votes against. Kisset Pelin. If the quarantine was still in effect, how did this fleet manage to move through your system? Were your hyperlane patrols that incompetent? Teal Inagarath. I'll let you know that it wasn't our merchants that smuggled the wheezing plague to the Desotrian. Besides, every time they presented a new ship from the Alliance carrying the latest permission codes, we're simply trying to figure out how they did that. Kissaplim, what? Permission to speak. Permission denied. 1 vote for, 5 votes against. Lithinius. While I am interested in this presentation, I hope you manage to understand their process as fast as possible. We can't allow the quarantine to be breached that easily. A Gamma. Moving on. The network took note of this earlier than other powers, and before they reached us, we used all of our infiltration programs and other nations to try and understand this fleet. We discovered reports from every star nation, from obscenely large to laughably small, reporting similar appearances, sending relief efforts, collecting refugees, offering medical or physical assistance, always on the front line, never diverging, always growing. We were concerned. When that front line, and by extension the fleet, came to our systems, we began to understand. Lithinius. Excuse me, you had infiltration programs in other nations, and you refused to notice anyone of the Alliance about them. Desotrian Hive. Please, Commandant. Don't try to pretend that you don't have spies all over nations. You can, and even would try to send the spy to the Hive if you somehow could. Allow A Gamma to continue. Lithinius lets out an audible sound of contempt. A Gamma. Continuing. As the fleet came upon our first outpost, we immediately trained our scanners on them, hoping to understand this new entity. However, when the results came, we were confused. If there was ever a spaceborne equivalent of what you saw on the surface of Earth, that was what it looked like to us. Horrifying, bleeding, burning, and wrecked, using cannibalized parts and impoverished repairs wherever it could. The fleet could barely be called functional, held hundreds of thousands of ships of thousands of different models, and was hopelessly beaten. Yet the transmission continued. offering services, repairs, resources such as alloy plating for the armored ships, or even small new improvements in technology. The machine pauses, then holds itself immobile for 10 TMS. Even as we refused their hail, as we had done to all organic at the time, they continued through every single one of our outer colonies up until the point the swarm reached the system. They continued, almost pleading, begging for us to accept their aid. When they reached the inner planets, we, against all established doctrine of the last 200 cycles of network's existence, began replying back. We traded contract services, and perhaps most importantly of all, we talked. The central projector turns to show a detailed map of an absolutely colossal mixed fleet, fitting the description given beforehand. Kasset Pelin openly gapes at the sight, and Kebrik Duan performs a religious symbol with his appendages. Latinius blinks her eyes irregularly. A Gamma. This burning wreck, as it turned out, carried humans. Not only humans, though. Ships belonging to every species whose system they passed through before the swarm incursion, many of which we already believed extinct, were present too. The humans, starving, bleeding, diseased and scared, poorly equipped and barely living, continued their journey. They offered medical help to every colony they passed through. Despite the subpar equipment, they embraced every refugee and ship that desired to join them, despite terminal overpopulation and taxed life support systems. They traded what they needed for daily life on the fleet for dirt cheap if it meant aiding people who would be suffering next. The central projector presents the face of a human female with several burn marks and scars on her face, worn military insignia on her shoulder representing the rank of admiral. These sapiens, these humans, only 500 million in number now, still fought as if the galaxy depended on their every act. These humans came upon the borders of an uncooperative, notoriously isolated machine empire and didn't hesitate to trespass and continue offering their help through every colony they passed, despite the fact that we didn't answer once in those colonies. These humans gave us very reason for me to be present here today, conversing with other organic nations in the hopes of you being a fraction of what the humans turned out to be. These pitiful lumps of flesh single-handedly saved hundreds of sapient species from total assimilation, billions of innocent colonists from the horrors of the swarm, trillions of credits worth of military resources, and most probably the entire galactic civilization, all by themselves, just by passing by, and in every time, despite having so little to spare, asking. The face of the human now revealing itself as a recorder transmission begins to move. Her left eye is evidently blind, her face is contorted in constant pain. She presents signs of slight dehydration, yet her eyes still show compassion and friendship. A smile is on her lips and her voice comes off weakly, but unwavering through the static of the poorly transmitted broadcast. How can we help? The council remains silent. The commandant, Serene Doge, and the High Seer displaying awe, while the Prime Minister, drone and machines display somber resignation. Desotrian Hive. Now, my fellow council members, you finally have your questions answered that you had gnawing at us for so long. Why have we called this meeting in the first place, and with such urgency that you needed to come here at such a time? Why is it that we had to bother such important, extremely busy heads of state in this time of great necessity? This is why. Tail in a Garath. It is to compensate the unsung heroes of the swarm incursion, the greatest defenders this galaxy has ever had, and the most kind, compassionate species it could ever welcome into its fold. For their bravery in the face of overwhelming odds, for their strength to endure the endless struggle, for their boundless conviction that, with every little action they took, they were closer to succeeding in their selfless call, and in the hopes that, by any chance, they could forgive us for ever forgetting them in the first place. A Gamma. And if the Council even dares to hesitate in doing the necessary act, know that we will go through any lengths to achieve our goal too. Firstly, by abandoning this Council, then by presenting the galaxy at large with what humanity has done for us, all of us, so selfishly and without hope of payment. And by using the powers available to us to bring that fleet, that poor, crippled, bleeding, ragtag fleet of leftovers, back to its rightful place as much as we possibly can, in order to thank them for what they have done. I can personally guarantee that even if the Galactic Society fails to recognize this essential act, the whole of the Litanai Interplanetary Defensive Network will share their organic life-bearing planets to reward the humans we owe our lives to. The Desotrian hives, all of our lives. Vote for beginning the process of reparation for humanity past. 6 votes for, 0 votes against. End of story. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Caspar Arnholtz, Draxzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.